Hello, I'm John Eves, and I'd like to welcome you to our first episode of Atlanta Speaks. Many of you may remember me as a former chairman of Fulton County, but few of you are aware that I have seminary training at Yale University, and I studied religion and theology. So AIB Network has provided me with an opportunity to blend my political experience with my theological training and offer this very unique programming which explores community issues and the role of faith embraced by our community leaders. Today we're going to talk about the integrity of elections in the state of Georgia and the controversy surrounding our most recent elections in our state. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." Today's guest is a man who has been at the center of controversy, but the controversy that has surrounded him is not because of a wrong action, but because of a right decision. Please welcome Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Brad, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, John.
Good to
Thank
see
you for inviting me.
My pleasure. It's been 3 years since I last saw you. We're talking about your election to this office and back in Taiwan Independence Day about 3 years ago.
Yep, and that ended up with a runoff election. So I'm very familiar with runoffs and the challenges of for the candidates. And obviously, here we are today.
So the shoe was on the other foot. Well, listen, I've known you for many years, and many times elected officials, people don't know who you actually really are before you were in elected office. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, actually, when I ran for Secretary of State, I was very upfront that I was a born-again Christian believer. That's really where I spent my time, is with family, in my construction business. I'm a structural engineer, and at church, and in a small group with a group of business owners, businessmen that were Christian business owners. But that's really my worldview, and then I got involved at City Council, State House, and now it's Secretary of State. But to your point, I think your introduction about integrity is so important to all of us that hold elected office.
For those of us who are people of faith, there's a sense of calling. So tell us why did you choose to run for elected office?
Probably goes back to when my son was at Auburn University. He sent me a note and his dad about making things a little bit better. And Josh Wilson has a song out. It's Dream Small. In Americans, we always dream big. We want to do the big thing, but sometimes we do the little things. We do them really well. We can really make important differences for people. So at City Council, we could start widening some streets, and we started, now they're doing parks and things like that to really improve what it is for the average day of someone that lives in my city of Johns Creek, just like you did as a Fulton County Commissioner. And then at the State House, you're looking at your district, but also the entire state. What can we do to make things a little bit better? Because if you look at Georgia, there's so many good things we have going on in Georgia. It's not like some of these other states that are really struggling. So really, where can we make incremental improvements to improve the lives of all Georgians?
So you go from City Council to state legislature, then constitutional offices. So what was that? What led to that switch?
Well,
change?
the Secretary of State's office has two functions that really interest me. One is we needed new voting machines with a verifiable paper ballot. We had the old machine, the DRE, the electronic voting, but we never had the paper ballot. I never felt comfortable with it, and a lot of voters didn't, and so we needed to upgrade that with the new system. And then I'm a licensed structural engineer, and I believe that professional licensing is something that we need to take a look at. How do we make sure we can streamline licensing for people, nurses, and electricians, plumbers? We have so many occupations and licensed professionals. And so what can we do? And those two key functions touch the Office of Secretary of State.
So you've kind of touched on my next question already, but so the Secretary of State, that's a big deal. Yes, we focus in on the elections and the registration, but what's the other side of it?
Well, corporations. So when I was in the State House, I had a bill that I passed, allow you to renew your corporation for up to 3 years, 1, 2, or 3 years, your choice as a business owner. Then as Secretary of State, we implemented that last year. And about 25% of our business owners did the 3-year option, some did the 2-year option, and some just renewed for 1 year. But we want to give business owners that option, decide how much paperwork they want to do. And so we're looking at how do we make things a little bit better for business owners? How do we make that a little bit better for people that have a business license, occupation, professional license, things like that?
So let's look at the other side, the elections process. So how, sort of explain to the audience, Civics 101, what does the office do in terms of the elections for the state of Georgia?
Well, what we do is we have an oversight role for all the counties. Counties run the elections. We have 159 counties. Second most number of counties. Texas beats us out, but Texas probably has 4 times the land area also. And everything they do in Texas is bigger, right? But we do things better.
There you go.
Here's the difference. But we needed new voting machines, and we had to decide what that machine was going to look like. So we worked with the General Assembly and pushed House Bill 316 through 2 years ago. That gave us the authorization to secure new machines, and then we also looked at how we could really improve the process. And so that's what we did, and then all of a sudden COVID-19 hit while we're in the middle of implementing the new machines. But we hit an awful lot of high marks this last election cycle. And I know that it was a contentious cycle. I told people that 9 months ago, I was very clear. I understand that we lived in polarized times, that half the people would be happy, half the people wouldn't be happy. But we wanted 100% of the people to have confidence in the system. And a lot of people said things that just weren't borne out by facts later to destroy some of that confidence. So we're going to be working hard to make sure that we can rebuild the confidence that everyone should have in the election process.
Yeah, so I'm a teacher. I teach at Spelman College. How would you grade your office in terms of the oversight of what was done in the presidential election?
Well, I'm going to let other people do that because no one should ever grade their own work. But what we do know is that we stood up for the first time in record time an online absentee ballot request portal. And what that did for the first time actually introduced photo ID because it connected to the Department of Driver Services. So it does answer the concern that so many people have is how secure is it? Once you're connected with Real ID with the Department of Driver Services, we know it's truly you that is asking for that absentee ballot. So that was the first. Then we also had to reach out to the business in Georgia, Coca-Cola, Delta, and many others, Home Depot, for plexiglass dividers, for face shields, for PPE, for the poll workers that were showing up. There's an awful lot of costs that were not expected a year ago.
Well, we're just getting warmed up here, but we want to get to some of the more controversial things that have evolved around decisions that you've made. So just hang with us and we'll be right back.
Democrats are stealing it. When they kicked out the watchers.
You are committing fraud.
Fraud is being perpetrated on the people.
10,000 dead people voted. How is this fair?
Stop the Democrats from stealing our election.
I say it's illegal voting.
Will not accept treason in America.
That is ridiculous. But it's called voter suppression.
Welcome back to Atlanta Speaks. I'm your host, John Eves. I'm very honored today to have a very special guest with us, the Secretary of State. So, integrity, very important theological value. How important is integrity in the elections process for the state of Georgia, for the voter?
At the end of the day, it all comes down to integrity. And that's why for the last 2 years when I was out talking to people, I always said that I know that we have 159 election directors, and some may lean on the left side of the aisle, some on the right side of the aisle, other ones play on both sides of that, but 100% of them have that integrity, which is walking the line of integrity. And as long as they have that personal integrity, y'all don't have anything to worry about. And that's what you saw at the county levels. They wanted to do their job. And that's what we did in our office, is we followed the law, followed the process, and we walked with integrity. Because at the end of the day, integrity matters.
So I commented earlier that I had a pretty good experience, in fact, a very good experience. I went to Ponce Library for my general election, and then I went to State Farm for the runoff, the senatorial runoff. So the verification process, so when you punch a name, and then you also have, there's a printout. So a little bit of the technical aspect of that. So is the printout cross-referenced with what you punch, and then it goes into a system, and then it's tabulated at some point?
So many people voted, so they know how it works all now. But when you look at that big, iPad, in effect, you make all your selections, and then when you press that button, it prints the ballot. It has not casted the ballot yet. And so when it prints the ballot, then the voter could look at all their choices, make sure, who did I want for president? Who did I want for the Senate? Who did I want for all these different races? Then they had control of that piece of paper, their ballot, and took it over there and put it on the scanner. And when they pressed that button, that is when the ballot was scanned, and then after it closed at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, that's when it would then be tabulated. So the voter had, control of that ballot for the entire process.
Right.
And that's when people said that the machines were flipping votes, you just really knew it didn't happen because the voter looked at it. But that's why we did that 100% hand recount to answer that question.
So you had how many? So the general election, you had the recount, and then you had another recount, or was it just?
We actually had, in effect, we had 2 recounts. The first one was a statewide audit. But part of the audit process, we could have just run those ballots through the machine, but we decided to do a hand retally because it was part of an audit. But a retally and a recount are virtually the same, and so we counted all 5 million ballots, put them up on a table like this, and then just looked at who did they want for president and put them in 3 different stacks, and we audited the presidential race, and we came up with the same result, plus or minus a few hundred votes, but the same result, that President Biden did win that race.
The people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry, and there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated, because the 2,236 and absentee ballots, I mean, they're all exact numbers that were done by accounting firms, law firms, etc. And even if you cut them in half, and cut them in half again, it's more votes than we need.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
So tell us about that phone call.
Obviously, what my takeaway is that the president had been fed a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and he believed it. Maybe he wanted to believe it, but people have just been not speaking the truth to him because everything that he was talking about, we'd already debunked.
Right. So what did you draw on to resist the pressure? I mean, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, makes a request of you. What caused you to not give in to his request?
Because at the end of the day, the thing that stabilizes America, like our foundation document, is our Constitution. That's what everything is built on. That's our keystone. That's our cornerstone, is we have a Constitution. So you follow the Constitution, you follow the law. Psalm 1:3, be firmly planted.
Right.
And I was firmly planted on the law.
That's one of my favorite scriptures as well. So you stood by the Constitution, and boy, you paid a price. So how have you dealt with it? I know you've had threats to you and your family. How does it feel when you make a decision and you did the right thing and people jump on you? So are there issues of faith that have sustained you? Just tell us a little bit about what you had to deal with.
Well, yeah, obviously I leaned into the Lord, and you're praying, and a lot of my friends were praying for me, but also I got texts. Not all of them were nastygrams. We got people that were supporting us, and a brother in Christ would send text and uplift me and uplift the governor because they understood that we were in a tight spot. But I'm just really grateful for everyone's prayers.
Did you ever fear for your life?
I was, I don't know about fear for my life, but obviously there were threats out there. And people had been, unfortunately, they're very committed to the president. I get that. And they're disappointed in the results, and so was I. I'm a Republican. I haven't changed. I'm still a Republican, John. But they also have been fed a lot of misinformation about some lady that was a poll worker here in Fulton County, and her name has obviously been spread across the world. She didn't do anything wrong. We had the GBI come in there with our investigators along with the FBI. And they said there's nothing there. And we also looked at Ware County. They said that the numbers were off 26%. They were off 0.26%. Now that's middle school math.
Have you grown as a person as a result of this, what you've gone through?
I hope so. Because you don't really want to look backwards, and you also don't want to live your life in bitterness, and you just have to move forward. Really now, I want to really engage voters and really sit down, like in Isaiah it says, come now, let us sit down and reason together. Let's have conversations. I do think in America, one thing we need is we need to have more civil discourse amongst ourselves. I think in the General Assembly, I think really what we do in the General Assembly, it could be a model for our national Congress, is that we actually have respectful conversations, and I think that's a good thing.
Purging from the polls is a classic sign of voter suppression. That's a classic tactic. Isn't it ironic that the people being purged from the polls, by and large, are Black and brown voters? How do you explain that?
Hoffler sued to return all 198,000 voters to the rolls. The suit was filed on behalf of rights groups headed by Black Voters Matter.
Latasha Brown, the co-owner of Black Voters Bus, is touring at least 12 states to spread their message of empowerment.
Even the National Voter Registration Act, a simple requirement is to have a third-party licensee. That's a simple requirement that you can literally just in a matter of being able to verify that those names, those 198,000 names never would have been on the list.
Right.
If they had just followed the procedure.
They said they moved. Did they move?
They said they moved and they didn't move. There's no evidence that those 198,000 people have moved. So we know what this is. This is another form, what we believe is voter suppression.
A federal judge told the state to meet with Black Voters Matter and fix the discrepancies, the massive errors in the purge list.
If one voter is disenfranchised, that's one voter too many.
Some Democrats feel that there have been voter suppression, purges of voter rolls, and they feel that things have not been fair. Can you address the purging process? And can you say that there is no type of voter suppression that's going on?
Well, that's what I really when I came into office, it was to really put an end to that talk about voter suppression. So with House Bill 316, what it allowed us to do was join an organization called ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. And so if you live in Georgia and you move to another state that has joined ERIC, and now there's 30 states plus the District of Columbia that have joined it, then we get notice that you've moved to Texas or North Carolina or Alabama. And then we can begin the process of taking off the voter rolls. When we do that, it is then objective, not subjective. And I'm an engineer, I like objective measures. And so when it's objective, then how could people complain about that? So that's how we'll go forward in cleaning up our voter rolls in the past. Also, many people don't realize that Americans are very mobile. About 11% of all Americans move over a course of a year. And with 7.6 million voters, that's 800,000 Georgians that move every year. Now they can move out of state, they can move into state, out of county, in the county, out of precinct, all over the place. And so it really makes it difficult in the counties to keep their voter rolls clean and accurate. And I think ERIC is a great step forward based on objective measures.
Who knows if you've moved? The post office actually has licensees who can go into the postal computers and tell you exactly who's filled out those change of address cards. So the post office contractor gives me the official list of people who've moved and people who haven't moved. And it turns out these voters, they hadn't moved. 198,351 of them.
So in other words, when a person leaves, there's a trigger.
That'd be a trigger.
So John Doe leaves, and
right.
You
move to North Carolina and register there, you move to Florida and register there, then we'll get a notification back. And then we don't just take you off right immediately, then we send a notice to your old address and we see where that goes to, and then we can then verify that John Eves actually has moved to Florida or Texas or Tennessee or some other state. And so that's really important. It's very objective then.
So purging is when a person moves out of state or out of district for a county.
Or they pass away.
Deceased. Any other grounds for a person to be purged off? Is
inactivity after they have been out for 2 election cycles, then they go on what's called the inactive list. But then right now it takes about 8 years before they actually come off at the end of the day.
Okay. So when you say 2 election cycles, 4-year cycles or?
It's two-year cycles, but then really that begins the process. So really at the end of the day, by the time it's done, it's pushing 8 years before they actually, are removed if they haven't had any activity. But all they have to do is show up again, say, I'd like to vote in this election, and you're back on the rolls.
So I have a lot of confidence in what you've told me in terms of the integrity of the process, using systems to objectively purge, et cetera. But there's a lot of bills floating in the House and Senate in terms of ID laws, et cetera, having an ID for early voting, mail-in voting. Do you have an opinion about that? Is that necessary?
Well, for early voting, the 15 days plus the Saturday, 16 days of early voting, you have photo ID. When you show up on election day, you have photo ID. And one of the things that we see years ago, the Democrats, actually favored, some kind of identification with absentee voting because it used to favor the other party. Now the shoe's on the other foot. Now the other party wants it. But I do note that both Minnesota and also Washington State have photo ID for their absentee ballot process, and I think that's appropriate. It's not a question of fraud. People say, well, where's the fraud? It's not that so much. It's confidence. When 50% of all Georgians have a concern about something, if you don't address that, it really undermines really the stability of society. We want people to be confident in the process. You may not like the results. I get that. But we want you to be confident in that process so you know that you really truly did lose or you truly did win. And then we can move off of that and move on to the next election.
So if you said you weren't going to grade yourself earlier, but if I were to give you an A- or B+, and you want to get to an A, what would you do going forward to improve the whole process in the future?
I think right now we really need to work on voter confidence. We took some major, shots, but also we had a very active public relations. I was out there doing press conferences probably 3-4 times a week. Gabriel Sterling was out there in the afternoon, really doing those strafing runs down low. If you had a question, just ask the questions. Very, very wonky stuff, but anyone had a question, he stood there and answered every single question every day. And so it was very open and transparent. So we think transparency is always a good thing. And then we also think that we can really help restore that confidence in the absentee ballot process. And then when we fully have the ERIC implemented and the people know it's objective, I think that's going to really give them confidence on the other side.
Do you think Georgia can be a model for the country?
Well, John, they already are.
Oh.
It's just that we actually,
Okay.
what many people don't realize is there was a German publication that came out, and an SEB member, a state election board member, received this from a friend in Germany. It said that in the time that there's 20 states that still haven't finished counting, and Georgia's already counted the presidential ballots 3 times. In other words, we had finished our race and had certified it, and some states were still in the process of doing it. But because our race was so close, that's why it got all that national attention.
Well, I guess the last question really is, you mentioned about voter confidence, getting out there. Are you working, is it appropriate for you to work with voter registration groups to try to increase the number of people who are registered? Because
we work with everyone. We in fact, I'm really grateful we reached out to the King Center. And we, Dr. Bernice King was very gracious. She let us bring our new voting machines, out to the King Center during a year ago, so that people could actually test them during King Week. And so I think that was really, gratefully accepted by us. We were just glad that we got an invite, that we opened the door for us. And so we've been reaching out to all sorts of groups. You have to reach out to both sides of the aisle because elections affect everyone. Both sides of the aisle. So you really have to do that on a bipartisan, nonpartisan basis.
What percentage of Georgia residents are registered? Is there?
It's right now we have about 7.6, 7.8 million Georgians are registered. We're up to probably about 85 to 90% of all eligible Georgia residents who are citizens are been registered. And so we really have done a great job on that. We have 16 days of early voting, election day voting, and then absentee. So we really have a strong model that the rest of the states can really follow.
Is there a county that's doing it right?
Oh, there's many that are doing it right. Lynn Bailey down in Richmond County in Augusta, Nancy Bourne in Muskogee County, Deb Cox down in Lowndes County, and then up in Bartow County. That's really run well. So there's a host
You just say
of
Fulton County.
well,
no comment. I'm not chairman anymore, so so it's not that important for you.
They've made great strides, and we had a monitor in there, and I think that we'll be able to provide them very useful, feedback to help move forward even further.
Listen, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for standing up for principles. Thank you for doing the right thing. Thank you for taking a hit for the team. I greatly respect you, and thank you for upholding the Constitution, because it's people like you that really is going to keep our country together. So thank you for being here, and I wish you much success in the coming days ahead.
Well, John, thank you. I want everyone to understand that we're going to make sure that we fight for fair and honest elections with the appropriate accessibility and security so everyone has confidence in elections in Georgia.
Well, friends, you've heard from the Secretary of State. Hold tight. You're going to hear from me in terms of a commentary. We'll be right back. The United States of America is one of the strongest democracies in the entire world. The main reason for the strength of our democracy is the ability of every citizen to cast a vote for their representatives in government on the state, federal, and local levels. Because our country is a democracy, the majority vote rules, and the people who are elected make decisions about policy, rules, laws, ordinances, and budgets for the jurisdiction that they represented. Make no mistake about it, elections are a competitive process. There are winners and there are losers. The winners of elections make the rules, the losers follow them. While our country is considered by many to be a model of democracy, it does have a checkered past of voting improprieties and oppression. Remember the pencil test, the grandfather clause, the poll tax, and the bean jar test? They were all strategies used in the American South to suppress the vote of people of color. Today, we had a chance to hear from the person in charge of elections in the state of Georgia. He was pressured, cajoled, enticed, but he didn't give in to the pressure. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right. In today's partisan, divided political climate, you need more leaders to do the right thing. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, black or white, rich or poor, we expect our officials to do the right thing. I believe that Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger did the right thing, and he should be applauded. As I close today's show, I would like to remind you that it is our responsibility to exercise the right to vote. My friends, we have something in our hands to improve our communities, our cities, our state, and our nation, and that is exercising the right to vote. Let's use the power that has been granted to us in our hands. Thank you again for joining us today on Atlanta Speaks. I'm Dr. John Eves.